Hey, what's up guys? In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my final tier list of K-pop girl groups for 2025. It's still too early in the year for me to talk about anything in 2026, so I typically reserve the first few months to cap off the previous year. Anyway, I posted part 1 way back in August, and a lot has happened since then, so my perspective has changed quite a bit. But if you haven't seen that yet, then I would recommend to watch that first, as I left off with a few expectations that may or may not have been met to finalize the year. Here are all the groups that I'm going to cover today, and I know I'm probably missing a handful on here, but these are the ones that I've been following for the majority of the year. And let's not forget about my criteria. Here are all the things that I'm going to take into account. I don't simply just base my opinion off one thing, as I try to balance things out to make my choices come from a more objective standpoint. Now, we've got a lot to get through, so let's get started. So for our first group, we got Baemon. So for the majority of the year, nothing really blew me away from them besides their world tour, which I would say has been one of the most dominant in the industry in 2025. I mean, they sold out venues quickly, they added more shows, etc. So really, it feels like they're living up to the hype, as I feel like they have such a huge fan base even since their pre-debut days. That being said, the second half of the year felt a lot more dominant for them, especially after the release of We Go Up. I feel like when Ghost and Hot Sauce came out, it didn't really meet fan expectations. Even though I really loved Hot Sauce, I wouldn't necessarily say it was one of their strongest releases. With We Go Up, however, we had the title track, of course, Super Duper Love, and Psycho, which I would say were all highlights of 2025, and I would even consider these gems within their discography. Still, I don't think anything from last year felt as iconic as 2024, which had Drip, Forever, and Sheesh, for example. Now, that's not to say that they've lost their touch or anything, as it's still too early for us to tell, and they still have a ways to go to build their discography, but so far, I really like what they have. A lot of people would consider them leaders of the fifth generation, which I would say is still valid. However, I would make the argument that Islet is at the forefront, with Baemon not too far behind. I think on a foundational level, Baemon has the potential to be a legendary group, probably as big as Blackpink, if YG gives them the proper resources, which I think so far has been going in the right direction, but clearly has a ways to go. However, with Rami's hiatus, I'm not sure what were to happen assuming she doesn't return. Now, I'm crossing my fingers that she does, and if she does return, I think it would attract a lot more attention, because I think a completed Baemon would make them much more stronger, especially considering that she's one of the more impressive vocalists in the fifth generation. Besides all of that, they haven't really picked up many awards, no day songs, one music show win. I mean, for a group with so much potential, it doesn't look that impressive so far, at least in the accolades department. But again, I kind of feel this way towards a lot of groups among the fifth generation for 2025. On the sales side of things, they're doing quite well, but I think it's even lower than some rookie groups out there like Hearts to Hearts, who has like over 800,000 compared to Baemon's 600,000. So that alone kind of threw me off a bit. Either way, Baemon started out kind of slow, but they ended the year much better. However, not enough to really be a standout group, at least not to me. So for that, I'm going to place them within the solid tier. Up next is ITZY, one of my all-time favorite groups. You know, with Girls Will Be Girls, I was really disappointed and practically lost hope in them, considering that it was one of my least favorite releases from them ever. But also, it just felt like ITZY didn't have any sense of direction in where they were going. For the longest time, ITZY has had issues with evolving as a group, and by that I mean, their music style still feels the same, and for me, it feels a bit repetitive. Like, yeah, it was great for its time, but even I catch myself growing tired of this style. Look at NMIXX for example. They started out all quirky and eventually evolved their music, and today they have seen a lot more success because of that. They've even put up numbers and rankings higher than ITZY, which is kind of crazy to think about, considering that ITZY were once leaders of the fourth generation. So if they want to go back to being a contender, they will need to take a similar path. Now, I think it would be really hard for ITZY to go up against giants like aespa and IVE to take the throne of the fourth generation, but they definitely have the talent and the lineup to do so. They just need to evolve. I've been looking at their streaming numbers over the years, and year after year, I always see it declining, which proves to us that this music style just isn't working anymore. With Collector and Tunnel Vision, I think it was significantly better than Girls Will Be Girls, but even then, they only managed to pull off one music show win. So the path ahead of them will be quite challenging, I fear. Top to bottom, their sales were actually really good, with about 800,000 copies sold. So their fanbase is still there, but like I said, I think their potential is far greater. And looking back, I feel like if they started earlier, then they could have had a shelf full of day songs by now, but they have zero, which to this day blows my mind. Now, comparing 2025 with recent years, I wasn't really super happy with how it started, but they ended it strong enough for me to believe in them once again. Not to mention, their Tunnel Vision tour is a great way to kick off 2026, so hopefully that works out for them. That said, I will place them in the OK tier. Alright, so for our next group, we got Stacy. So I remember talking about them earlier last year, and when comparing their numbers across their career, 2025 on paper was one of their worst years in a long time. I mean, they had a few releases such as S and I Want It, and even though it was enough to make me a fan of the group, it looks like it just wasn't enough to resonate with fans. So they had about a quarter million sales, which is actually decent for a group of their stature. I expected a bit more. Plus, they have only one music show win for Bebe, and that's basically where it ends. I mean, they had low streaming and charting numbers, so really it just felt like 2025 was a miss for them. Not to mention, their activities were pretty light, so for me, I can't really see them going any other tier besides the bad tier once again. Now, this isn't to say that Stacy has fallen off or anything, I really doubt it, but I think they would need to approach 2026 with something that puts them back on track. I mean, for so long, I feel like they were the underdogs of the fourth generation, and at one point, they were on their way to being a contender, but it feels like they really dropped the ball somewhere. But hopefully, they can turn things around this year. Moving on over to Kiki. I think they started their debut really well with I Do Me being a highlight of 2025. I know at the time Hearts to Hearts also released The Chase, so in a way it felt like two big rookie groups were debuting at the same time. But I think it's fair to say that Hearts to Hearts has definitely walked away with being the clear frontrunner of all the rookie groups last year. Back to Kiki though, I instantly became a fan of this group, and I would say that they have a clear path ahead of them to be a future 5th generation leader. So numbers wise, they're actually doing really well on domestic charts with peaks as high as top 5. They've also pulled 2 music show wins and have about a quarter million copies sold. Now they haven't really been super active last year. I think they focused a bit more on their music and made a few appearances, which is fine for their first year, but hopefully this year they begin touring, as I feel like it would attract more fans and start building their reputation within the industry. So for a rookie group, I would call this a successful debut, as they checked off pretty much all the boxes for me, so for that, I will place them within the great tier. Now let's talk about Idol. Last year was their first run under a new name since their contract renewal, and to be honest, it was probably one of my least favorite years for them in a really long time. Ever since I started listening to K-pop, I've only known Idol for their dominance with top shelf comebacks releasing left and right, so think Queen Card, Super Lady, etc. I mean, even 2024, I didn't think it was their best work, but they were still winning day songs and pulling music show wins. But 2025, we didn't really see any of that. So last year felt pretty light for them, only 2 releases, but they still picked up over 1 million copies sold, which is great. But their rankings weren't really to their standards, and 0 music show wins across the entire year, which is actually really disappointing. Not to mention, they weren't super active, and kind of similar to Stacy, it might be one of their weakest years across their entire career. But the 1 million copies sold is not easy for anybody, so that's really their only saving grace at this point. Therefore, I will place Idol within the OK tier ahead of ITZY. They're pretty much neck and neck, but ITZY to me has really struggled for a while now, while Idol, even on a down year, has 1 million sales, which kind of shows you the standard that they have. Up next, Triple S. I think over the past couple of years, Triple S have slowly started growing in popularity, and I would say that they're heading in the right direction, especially since they have subunit work considering how massive they are in terms of a lineup. 2024 really put them on the map with Assemble 24, and with Assemble 25, I think that they have proven to show consistency in terms of quality of work, which is great to see. Numbers wise, they are showing impressive stats for a rising 5th generation group. With over 800,000 sales, 2 music show wins, chart rankings entering as high as top 3, they've maintained over 1 million monthly streams on Spotify, and have been pretty active with their subunits throughout the entire year. Now, they've been in the industry for a few years now, but to me, it still feels like they're stuck within that growth stage. Not their fault, they don't have the backing of a big-time company, but with what they have, they are still doing phenomenally well for themselves. Either way, I think down the road, they could potentially become contenders within the industry, but for now, I'm going to put them in the solid tier behind Baemon. Up next, aespa. You know, coming off the generational run that they had in 2024, where they were winning multiple day songs in pretty much every award show, my expectations for them going into 2025 were through the roof. And to be honest, I have mixed feelings about it. For starters, almost nothing from last year really blew me away. I mean, think of Armageddon, Supernova, and Whiplash. Those songs really set the tone for aespa and have left a lasting impact on me that I still feel to this day. And I just didn't feel that with Rich Man, Sync Access Line, or even Dirty Work, which was probably the closest one, but still just didn't do it for me. Not to say that those were bad, far from that actually, they were great, but again, the aespa standard is just on another level compared to most groups out there. That being said, they are still on top once again. If we want to talk numbers, for instance, they picked up 14 music show wins, over 2 million copies sold, rankings as high as number 1. They've been one of the most active groups, and most importantly, they've earned a day song at TMA for Muse of the Year. I even got the chance to see them myself way back last February during the Sync Parallel Line tour, and it was insane how dominant they were on stage. Truly an unforgettable experience to see Prime aespa on stage. Anyway, even though I didn't think their quality of work in terms of music was up to their standard, I still think that they are on top of the food chain in K-pop and had a dominating year, and because of that, I gotta put them up in the perfect tier. Up next, Kiss of Life. Kiss of Life to me has been one of the most impressive groups of 2024, and similar to aespa, heading into 2025, my expectations were also quite high. However, I think it's fair to say that we are talking about two totally different caliber groups here. aespa has already proven themselves to be K-pop legends, whereas Kiss of Life has only begun. Still though, I think that Kiss of Life has the talent and the foundational elements to reach such a status. With 2025, however, we didn't really see anything that could emphasize that. I mean, they've had a couple of releases, but their sales numbers have plummeted, sitting just barely at 100,000 copies sold. That's worse than the majority of groups that you'll see on here today. Their charting numbers are significantly better, with them entering as high as top 10 on some platforms, and have been pretty stable with their streaming numbers. However, they weren't able to pull off any music show wins last year, which is rough for a group with so much potential, but I would say that they've been pretty active through the year. Overall, I would consider this a down year for Kiss of Life, but their charting numbers tells me that they still could make a return to contender status, but for now, I will put them up in the OK tier behind ITZY. Moving right over to Bad Villain, this is one group that I've been following since their debut, and they instantly blew me away with their song Hurricane. But unfortunately, I can't really say the same about anything else since then. I mean, there isn't really much to say about them since they haven't really been active at all, and don't really check off anything when it comes to my criteria. So, no wins, no charting numbers, no accolades, etc., no activity, right? The only thing that stood out was their monthly listeners, which sits at 250,000, which is quite impressive considering how underground they are. But again, nothing else about them really sticks out, and that's even for groups within the lower end of the industry, so that's kind of saying something. Gotta put them in the bad tier behind Stacy. Now, let's move on over to Meow. I think they are one of the sleeping giants within the fifth generation, and even though they don't have a ton of music, I think what they do have so far, it's some top shelf work. Their 2025 has felt a bit quieter compared to most of the groups out there, and we've only really seen a handful of appearances all year. But still, even with their activities being kind of light, their numbers have shown strong signs of them being a rising contender in the industry, so they've pulled tens of millions of streams on Spotify, with an average monthly 3 million listeners. They've also reached as high as top 5 within the charts, and 250,000 sales, and 2 music show wins. So for a group that's only been around for about a year or so, they're doing quite well. Still, I think they got a ways to go to become a pillar within the fifth generation, but clearly they have the foundation to reach that position. They are pretty talented across the board, their quality of work is on an elite level, and they're backed by the Black Label. Clearly not on the same level as some of the big four companies out there, but also not one of the smaller ones either. So Meow is definitely a group that I would invest in. For now, however, I will place them within the solid tier behind Baemon. Now, Young Posse, another underground fifth generation group that I think has some potential. They've been around since the beginning of the fifth generation and haven't really captured my attention until last year with their releases of Cold and Growing Pain. They focus heavily on the hip-hop style, which we've seen more prominent within the fifth generation, but I think Young Posse really dominates that style. For example, we've seen their true power unleashed with their songs Yes Sir and Freestyle, which left me excited for their next comeback. That being said, if we were to look at their numbers, it's more on the lower end when comparing it to the majority of groups on this list. So throughout all of 2025, they've only managed to sell about 30,000 copies, but have reached as high as top 10 on domestic charts. Not to mention, they were really light on activities and no music show wins. Again, not their fault, but they don't really have the resources of a big time company, so I guess they just don't really have much flexibility when it comes to making a full fledged comeback. So that includes tours, fan events, etc. So I think it would be really difficult for them to climb the ladder towards serious contention, but just the fact that they've reached high rankings on the domestic charts tells me that it's not impossible. They just need one good hit to put them on the map. I personally think their music is phenomenal, with Growing Pain being one of my favorite releases last year. I pray that they make it one day. But for now, I'll put them in the okay tier. Only reason why I didn't put them in the bad tier is just because they're like one of the smallest groups out there in terms of resources and are quite limited. So not their fault, but also I would say 2025 was my favorite year for them. Coming up, NMIX. I would say that it's been a long time coming for NMIX. I mean, look back at a few years ago, they were kind of similar to Stacy in the sense that they had potential, but it just wasn't really showing much progression. They started out with unique concepts that clearly had a focus on being different from the rest, but unfortunately, it just wasn't resonating with many fans. Also, they weren't really in contention for any music show wins or even sales for that matter, but last year was a totally different story. I mean, numbers wise, I think we're nearing primetime NMIX. They have sold about 1.5 million copies, peaked as high as number 1 on multiple charts, were even recognized by Billboard as having one of the best K-pop songs and albums of 2025, and have achieved over 13 music show wins and several triple crowns. Look, I've been a huge fan of NMIX since the beginning of their FAE 304 trilogy, and to see such an underrated and talented group receive all these wins and achievements makes me really, really happy for them. But again, similar to what I've spoken about ITZY, it took NMIX to evolve to get to this point, and because of that, they are out here winning in all areas. The only thing missing for NMIX at this point is a day song, which I believe if they continue to dish out great releases and numbers like this, then it's definitely in their horizon. If I were JYP, I would go all in on NMIX because they just might have a future legendary group in their hands. And now is the time to allocate their resources to send them in the right direction. Like, I'm talking bigger tours, promotional events, maybe some solo work, maybe even put them on stages at award shows like Mama or Melon Music to give them more exposure. Without question, I will put NMIX up in the perfect tier behind aespa. Moving on over to IZNA. Again, another underrated 5th gen group, but probably leaning more on the rising group side at this point. They've only been around for about a year or so, kind of similar to Meow in terms of debut. As for their numbers, they sold about 250,000 copies, reached as high as number 2 on domestic charts, and have earned at least one music show win for every comeback, with a total of 3. I feel like a lot of people really sleep on IZNA, and even though they haven't had their own tour yet, they have made a lot of appearances. So really, it just feels like they're pushing hard to set a strong first impression from fans. Not to mention, they've won Best Performance and Favorite Rising Artist, so I would call 2025 a successful year for them. Now, I would consider myself a fan, but still working on my bias. Regardless, I think they checked off pretty much all the boxes for their first year. I know they debuted in 2024, but it was towards the end of November, so realistically, I would let their first year roll over to 2025 as well. But overall, I really like where they're headed. I think if they could try to go on a tour this year, then that would help them a lot with their growth and really help with their contention within the 5th generation. For that, I will place IZNA within the great tier ahead of Kiki. Moving over to Kepler. I think if we want to talk about their career, I would say that they started out really well. I mean, they basically did well in all areas for a rising group, but just never really moved any further to a contender status. With 2025, they hover around 300,000 sales, which is a huge plummet from their million copies sold back in 2022 and 23. Not to say that they've fallen off, but more so just a stumble within their career. Charting wise, they actually did pretty good and cracked the top 10 in some platforms, but earning just one music show win for Bubblegum, which is the release that attracted me to the group. So really, it just feels like a mixed bag for Kepler. I think with Bubblegum, they still showed us that they are capable of being a strong group in a foundational sense, but kind of similar to ITZY, they've been in the game for a couple of years now and just haven't really been able to reach the higher levels that they were once in. For that, I gotta put Kepler within the OK tier, behind Kiss of Life. Next up, Islet. I think out of all the groups within the fifth generation, Islet to me has been the most impressive. I mean, not just because of their stats on paper, but also because they've been the most consistent. From their debut to today, Islet does not miss. They just keep putting out bangers. So this year, for example, Do the Dance, Topping, Not Cute Anymore, Almond Chocolate. Not only would I consider these highlights of the year, but even fifth generation classics. This year, they started to dabble more with their activities, such as fan meetings and Glitter Day, which has seen a lot of success, but hopefully this year they will begin their first world tour. Because I would consider them leaders of the fifth generation, and I believe that they would be so successful. Numbers wise, they're doing pretty strong top to bottom, over 500,000 copies sold, chart rankings hovering around the top 10. They've averaged almost 17 million monthly listeners on Spotify, 4 music show wins, and have won several performance awards. So really, I gotta say that they've had a successful 2025. Now, was it as big as 2024? No. Their Magnetic era was their shooting star moment, and really, that was their chance to win a day song, and should have won one, in my opinion. Now, I'm not going to say that they can't do it, but if they can't do it with Magnetic, then I think it's going to be very difficult to surpass that, but not impossible. Obviously, no day songs for them in 2025, but out of all the groups within the fifth generation, I think Islet has the greatest odds. So hopefully they can pull it off later this year. That said, I gotta give them their flowers, and I will place them within the perfect tier behind NMIXX. Now, let's talk about Artemis. I kind of discovered them a little late, so unfortunately I didn't include them in part 1 of this video, but either way, I think they did pretty decent for the second year. Now, they're not as big as their peers Triple S, literally, but I would consider them more underground. Numbers wise, they sold almost 200,000 copies, had some rankings, almost reached as high as top 5, and averaged about 300,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Nothing super crazy, but it's clear that they have a small and loyal fan base. Still, not a single music show win for them under their belt, so it kind of feels like they haven't made much progress. I wouldn't really count them out considering that they've actually reached high rankings on domestic charts where it matters most. So hopefully things get better this year. At this point, I think the only thing Artemis should be focusing on at this point is their fan growth, and they need to make a name for themselves within the fifth generation to make their presence felt. But for now, I'll put them in the OK tier behind Kepler. And finally, we have Twice. I think that it's fair to say that Twice, without question, has the best performances across all of 2025. I mean, it's their 10th anniversary and they are going all out with their activities. So they got their tour, collaborations, their movie, etc. And not to mention they dropped 3 albums, with This Is For being my favorite Twice album of all time. It truly amazes me how Twice has been in the game for over a decade and are still like one of the most active groups out there. Not just that, but the fact that all 9 members are still together is just outstanding within itself. As in the K-pop world, that's almost unheard of, especially at 10 years, so my hat goes off to them. Now, let's talk numbers. How did they do across the board in 2025? Well, they've sold just over 1 million copies, with rankings reaching as high as number 1 on some domestic charts, and averaging over 20 million monthly streams on Spotify, which is pretty big. On top of that, they've won 5 Bond songs, which is a main prize, but just shy of the grand honor of a day song, and a single music show win. So even though they had a huge year in terms of activity and releases, they haven't really achieved much on the accolade side of things. And for a group of their caliber, after seeing them go so hard like this, it's a bit disappointing to me. That being said, I gotta put them up in the great tier ahead of ISNA. I know for a fact that I'm going to catch some heat for leaving them out of the perfect tier, but I can't put them in the same realm as aespa or even NMIXX, especially, again, for a group of their caliber. Let's keep it going with Blackpink. Alright, so this one is a bit shorter considering that they've only released 1 song. That's right, just 1 song. And I remember when I made part 1 of this video, we were told to expect an album later in the year, but again, it got delayed. So for me, that really affected my expectations a bit. But to be fair, I would always take a delay over a bad release. So hopefully it's worth the wait. That being said, even though they only had 1 song, we cannot deny how dominant they were throughout the year. So let's look at the numbers. With this 1 song alone, they received almost 500 million streams on Spotify. Again, almost 500 million. with an average monthly of 35 million listeners. Also, they've reached number one on multiple major platforms, both domestically and globally, and have even debuted at number one on Billboard's Global 200, which is not easy for anybody. And let's not forget about their 10 music show wins, which includes 3 Triple Crowns, 3 Bond songs, which is a tier lower than the Day Song, and several international awards like Best Group at the VMAs. And even though their world tour is basically an extension of Born Pink, it's one of the most successful out there among girl groups. So really, we cannot deny Blackpink's success even after a 2-year hiatus, which I think further emphasizes their caliber of a group. That being said, they basically checked off all the boxes here with just a single. But that delayed album didn't sit too well with me as a fan, if I'm being honest, so I will place them in the great tier, but ahead of Twice. I mean, think about it. Twice went all out and didn't put up the same numbers as Blackpink domestically and especially globally, and nowhere near the music show wins as them either. But again, they are pretty close in terms of Bond songs, so Blackpink with 3, Twice with 5, and Twice also has 1 million sales, whereas Blackpink didn't have a physical release to begin with. And both had massive tours, so really, it just feels like a toss-up. I don't know, this one was really hard for me, and honestly, it feels like a 1A and 1B type situation, but I don't feel like any of them had a perfect year either way, especially for their caliber of group. If you want to swap them, go for it, but I was just more impressed with Blackpink because they were able to achieve more with less. Now, moving on over to Irene and Seulgi. Alright, so this one is pretty much the same as in part 1, considering that nothing much else has really happened since I last talked about them. They had their album Tilt way back last May, and had a short and sweet sort of comeback. So they had a tour with a handful of shows that sold out, and have sold almost 250,000 copies, which I would say is quite impressive for a subunit. No music show wins, but they had rankings reaching as high as top 5, which is great. And that's basically it. No other accolades or activities since then, and it's kind of trickier with them because the last time we've seen them release any subunit work was like over 5 years ago, so there just isn't much to compare. And comparing it to their previous work together, it looks about the same, with the only difference being that they had a music show win last time, and that's pretty much it. So for that, I will just leave them in the solid tier behind Triple S. Let's talk about another underground group, VVS. I feel like almost nobody ever talks about them, but for me, I think they have a lot of potential to be a strong hip-hop styled group within the 5th generation, and they're more hardcore on the rapping, so I would really compare them to someone like Young Posse. However, if we were to stack them up against every single group on here on paper, they are the smallest of the bunch, as they haven't really done anything besides release music. No chart rankings, no music show wins, no activity either. Their Spotify doesn't even reach 100,000 monthly listeners. With all that being said, I'm still really excited about this group because I do love their music, so hopefully their 2026 looks much better. For now, however, I will put them within the OK tier behind Artemis. Moving right along to LE SSERAFIM. If we want to talk about consistency, I think LE SSERAFIM has really been one of the most impressive, and that goes as far back as their debut. Not just that, but I think that it's fair to say that they're out of the majority of the 4th generation groups out there, that LE SSERAFIM has a really, really strong global reach. It feels like year in and year out, they've always been like one of the top groups out there, but they have really struggled picking up day songs until recently. Let's go over their stats. So in 2025, they had 3 releases which were successful, selling about 1.7 million copies, ranked at the number 1 spot in several major platforms, both domestically and globally, entered the top 10 on Billboard's Top 200, and was one of the best albums sold in the US among girl groups. Not to mention, they've averaged about 17 million monthly listeners on Spotify, with 5 music show wins, 3 Bond songs, and most importantly, they've won a Day Song for Icon of the Year. And let's not forget about how successful of a tour they are having, with sold-out shows and new dates being added, so it really feels like there's high demand for LE SSERAFIM, and some might even say that they're in their prime, which is valid. Therefore, I will place them within the perfect tier between aespa and NMIXX. Moving on over to Eunice, again, another underground group within the 5th generation and kind of similar to some of the smaller groups that we've already covered. Besides their releases and a few appearances here and there just isn't really much else to highlight. I mean, they did reach as high as top 3 within some domestic charts for their album Swish, which is the album that has made me a fan of the group, and have earned their first music show win, but that's basically it. I mean, they did have a mini tour as well, but nothing else major. Again, no fault to their own considering that they don't have the best resources, so again, expectations naturally would be on the lower end for me. So I'll place them within the OK tier behind Artemis. Following them is 50/50, another group that I would say hovers within the underrated side of the fifth generation. I would say that a lot of people still tie the song Cupid to them, even though the lineup has changed drastically. So, really, I think rebranding for them may be quite of a challenge. Even so, I think they have a lot of potential considering their numbers from last year. So, they've sold over 100,000 copies, which is quite impressive. They've reached as high as top 3 on some domestic charts and have won the top 10 Best Artist Award at KGMA. Their streaming numbers are also really high, but most of that is attributed to Cupid, which is work from the original lineup. Still no music show wins and no major tours, but hopefully we see something for 2026. Again, we can clearly see that they do have potential, but jumping over that rebranding hurdle may be difficult. That said, I will place them within the OK tier ahead of Kepler. Now, let's talk about Hearts to Hearts. Without a doubt, the biggest rookie group out there right now, and their potential is so high to be a future leader of the fifth generation. I mean, look at their debut, The Chase. It was an instant fifth generation classic and sold about 250,000 copies on day one, which is really impressive. By the end of the year, their total sales reached as high as almost 1 million copies, with their domestic rankings reaching as high as top 3. 4 million monthly listeners on Spotify, and 2 music show wins, and multiple Best New Artist awards. I've been pretty crazy about this group all year long, and with the resources of SM and the talent within their lineup, I think Hearts to Hearts will go very far, and I pray that they do. Without a doubt, they belong up in the perfect tier behind Islet. Alright, so let's move on to another rookie group, Baby Don't Cry. So there was a bit of hype behind them as Soyeon from Idol was the one who wrote their songs, and comparing them to other rookie groups out there, they seem to have one of the lowest numbers out there. So for example, they've only had a couple songs and none of them have really made it on any charts out there, but their music video did surpass about 20 million views for their debut song. But besides that, they haven't won any music show wins, a few stage performances, and no sales figure. So really, it just felt like a really underwhelming debut, but I will be honest, I feel like we haven't really seen their potential yet, so I kind of want to give them another year before I start making some final thoughts about them. But for now, I gotta place them within the bad tier, ahead of Bad Villain. Alright, for our next group, we have VVs. Another underrated group within the fourth generation, and similar to Irene and Solgi, we really haven't seen much else from them since the last time I talked about them, and that was way back in July. And that was for their album, which has only sold about 70,000 copies, but reached rankings within the top 10 domestically, which is pretty impressive. And they've also had their tour, which has been quite successful. Again, no wins or any other accolades from them last year, not to mention they haven't earned a music show win since 2022. So really, it just feels like a mixed bag. Their Spotify looks pretty strong with over 1 million monthly listeners, but most of that is from their previous big hit, Maniac. Speaking of Maniac, I feel like that was their big chance to put themselves on the map, but unfortunately, I feel like they haven't really grown much since then. And that was a few years ago. However, I really liked their album last year, so I still believe that they could do it, but admittedly, it will be a bit difficult. So for now, I will place them within the OK tier, behind Kepler. Moving on to yet again another underrated group, Racine. So I discovered them a little late this year, but man, I really love their music. And looking at their stats, it looks like they're doing pretty decent for a group of their caliber. So they've sold almost 250,000 copies, which is great, reached many top 5 spots on the charts, and have averaged around 3 million monthly listeners on Spotify. However, they still haven't picked up any music show wins. Now, I can't really speak on their first year much, but going based off of these numbers, it looks like they are progressing slowly. That said, because they are making some amazing music, that I could see them climbing the ladder in the industry if they continued to put out great work. Think of Triple S or even NMIX, for example. They started out quite small, but have slowly grown over time because of their great music. For now, however, I will place Racine within the OK tier, ahead of VV's. And finally, IVE. Kind of obvious where I'm going to place them, but man, did they have one hell of a run in 2025. Let me remind you, they were dominating since the beginning of the year. They earned a colossal 20 music show wins, achieved multiple Triple Crowns, sold over 2 million copies, reached number 1 on all major platforms, achieved their 5th perfect all kill, won multiple bond songs, and picked up 3 day songs, which is outstanding. Not just that, but they were also really active all year long with so many appearances and a sold out tour. So really, it just feels like we were seeing IVE in their prime, as this was one of their most impressive years in their career. However, IVE is no stranger to the throne of the fourth generation, as they've basically had years similar to this since their debut, with the exception of 2024, where they won basically nothing. 2025 proved to us that IVE are leaders of the fourth generation. Now, I would make the argument that the throne has been between aespa, IVE, and New Jeans over the years, but there's no doubt that IVE is considered a legendary group already. That being said, I'm putting IVE at the very top of the tier list. And there you guys have it, my final tier list of K-pop girl groups for 2025. It's been one hell of a year, and even so, I feel like most of the groups here weren't as dominant as years prior. Like, if we look at all of the award shows, it really felt like boy groups had a firm grip on 2025. Hopefully with 2026 we see some improvement, but most importantly for me, I hope we get to see the groups within the fifth generation finally taking home some day songs. I mean, we've seen the potential of groups like Baemon, Eyelid, and Hearts to Hearts, but we have yet to see any of them pick up any day songs to start carving out their placement as icons in the industry. I think foundationally, a lot of groups within the fifth generation have potential to become legendary, whether that's talent, the music, the performances. I think there are so many opportunities here, and I would say that it's about time that we start seeing some results if they want to be as big as their predecessors. As for the fourth generation, I would argue that many groups are within their prime, so think of aespa, LE SSERAFIM, NMIXX, etc. So definitely no sign of them slowing down anytime soon, which is great. The third generation has pretty much faded for the most part, with only a few groups left standing, and it's clear that Twice is here to stay. I don't know for how much longer, but from what I've seen last year, it looks like they're not leaving anytime soon, and I'm seeing them in March, which I really look forward to. Anyway, guys, I really appreciate you watching. I know that I've missed out on a few groups, and if there are any that you would like for me to talk about later this year, then drop them down in the comments and I will do my best. I can't guarantee anything considering that I talk about a lot of groups already, and there are new groups debuting all the time, so it's kind of hard to keep track of them sometimes. Eventually, I might even have to set a limit and just talk about the ones that I've been following for years, but I'll keep trying. That said, if you want to share your thoughts, drop them down in the comments, as I do appreciate different perspectives. And if you enjoyed the video, then please drop a like, as that does help out the channel a ton. And if you like these type of videos, then consider subscribing, as I make these tier lists and rankings throughout the year. Again, thanks for watching, and take care.